Hello, I'm Dr. Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. I want to start by talking about rushing women syndrome, which is a phrase that you coined during that really powerful TEDx talk in 2014, and I'll put the link for that in the notes. And you continue to beautifully support women all over the world through your online courses, through your books, through your social media, and through all of your products. So what was it that you were actually observing in your clinic? And this is going back probably nearly 10 years ago, isn't it? Or at least 10 years ago. What were you observing that prompted you to write the book? And really, how does that compare with what you're seeing today?
Thanks, Jodi. So, yes, I wrote the book Rushing Woman Syndrome back in 2011. So hard to believe, 11 years ago. And it was based on an emerging trend I was seeing in women's health. And so women were coming to see me as patients, and they didn't have a disease, but they were incredibly stressed. They had thyroids that weren't working as well as they once did. They had immense challenges with their reproductive system, so either with heavy, clotty, painful periods or periods that weren't showing up anymore, challenges with fertility, very debilitating transitions through perimenopause to being postmenopausal. Everything, all the symptoms were intensifying. There were women who would gain body fat for the calorie equation didn't explain it, so I knew there was something else going on with their biochemistry. So essentially, lots of ill health, but not disease. And it led me to, I always want to get to the heart of things. There are three pillars to my work: the biochemical, the nutritional, and the emotional. And I started to look at what was going on with women's health through those three lenses. And I could see that it was the constant, relentless production of stress hormones that was essentially communicating to the woman's body that she wasn't safe. And so, because partly what happens, obviously, we have the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and the hypothalamus in the brain is forever asking, am I safe? And it looks out into the world, is there oxygen? Is there food available? What's the temperature? So it's looking in a very physical sense. It also looks emotionally, of course, as well. But the hypothalamus also looks into our blood for information. And when it sees high circulating levels of adrenaline, it doesn't understand that adrenaline is there because, well, unfortunately, and I'm sure your listeners are aware of this, but caffeine leads the human body to produce adrenaline. Our perceptions of pressure and urgency lead the body to make adrenaline. And so if we look at human evolution, if we say that science suggests humans have been on the planet for somewhere between about 150,000 and 300,000 years, and if we allow that great expanse of time to be represented by a 1 kilometre walk, then the last 75 years, so since the back end of World War II, which I call the commercial era, so much has changed. But it was in that commercial era that would represent one step in that 1 kilometre walk. So in other words, it's a tiny, tiny amount of time, and yet so much has changed. Pesticides were first introduced to the food supply in the 1940s. We saw the introduction of colour television, credit cards, mobile phones, the internet, social media, and it has literally changed our stress response. So where in the past the hypothalamus saw adrenaline in our blood, it meant that our life was literally in danger. Now the adrenaline in our blood is there from either lifestyle choices or perceptions more often than not. But it's still, we haven't evolved for long enough for the body to be able to discern between the adrenaline we make when our life's in danger and when it's from an overflowing email inbox. And so that poor old hypothalamus then says to the pituitary gland in the brain, we're not safe. You need to now communicate to all the glands you're in charge of. So the pituitary then says to the thyroid, to the ovaries, to the adrenals, we're not safe, respond appropriately. So on top of that, all of that signalling then leads us to activate a part of the nervous system called the sympathetic nervous system, which keeps us in that fight or flight response. So even though that's a lot of geeky kind of science, it's basically the constant activation of the HPA axis, and it's getting false information that we're not safe. And then we get stuck in what I call sympathetic nervous system dominance. And so we stay in that stress response, and then that has an enormous ripple effect because it doesn't just happen for half a day. It's how it's coming about because of how we now live, and so we live like it. And after a couple of years of living like that, the body then starts to give us feedback that something needs to change. So I kind of put all that together and called it rushing woman syndrome.
Yes, it's a beautiful phrase and it sums it up. And what you've just described, when I talk to, and we love the science here, so and you've done such a beautiful job, as you always do, of making it really clear exactly what you're describing. And we know with our anxiety that it could be and we could imagine something that is going to cause our stress response. It causes our brain to detect a threat and to switch on all of the changes that need to take place to keep us safe. And as you were just saying, it's designed to be switched on, there to be some sort of response. Could it be running from a wild animal? Could it be bunkering down away from a rival tribe, or whatever it is, getting out of the way of a car in more modern times? But it's switched on all the time. And if it doesn't settle down, as you mentioned, that we don't have that opportunity for that rest and repair, then we can see the ramifications in our physiology and in our health. And so in terms of that rest and repair, you write about, and we know that this can happen in between those times when we're activated, but also overnight. And I wonder what you might be able to tell us about the role of really restorative sleep when it comes to this rushing woman syndrome.
So the opposite arm of the sympathetic nervous system is the parasympathetic nervous system. I often refer to it as the green zone. So it's that lovely calm arm of the nervous system. And it's when we're really healthy, we can swing so easily between sympathetic activation and parasympathetic activation. But because these parts of the nervous system are part of the autonomic nervous system, we can't boss them around. So we can't just have sympathetic nervous system activation, our heart rate increases, blood pressure increases, the blood supply that's normally so fantastic to the digestive system gets diverted away from digestion to our periphery when that's happening. Sleep is enormously disrupted when we have this activation of the sympathetic nervous system, obviously because the adrenaline is saying your life's in danger, it's not safe for you to sleep deeply or restoratively. So the counterbalance to that obviously is to activate that lovely calm arm of the nervous system. But because it's part of the autonomics, we can't instruct it. We can't just say, oh, just chill out, dude. You've got all that adrenaline there because you've had 3 coffees and you're overwhelmed with your email inbox overflowing and you're worried about a conversation you had 3 weeks ago. You can't just override that and say, just chill out, we're okay, we're safe. So the only thing science currently knows where we can influence the activation of that calm arm of the nervous system is to extend the length of our exhalation. So in other words, making the out breath longer than the inhalation. And the reason that activates that calm arm of the nervous system is because we would never be able to breathe like that if our life truly was in danger. So we can have a profound impact on lowering our stress hormones and therefore improving our quality of sleep by becoming incredibly breath aware. So if we watch a little baby, they breathe in and out through their nostrils and their little belly goes up and down when they breathe. Whereas if you walk into a room full of adults, quite many of them are breathing through their mouths. It's all upper chest and the diaphragm is barely engaged, if at all. So we're not breathing diaphragmatically. And that just perpetuates the cycle, as I'm sure many of your listeners are aware of. It just feeds the production of adrenaline. Adrenaline drives it, but then it asks the body to make even more adrenaline because that style of breathing keeps us with the sympathetic nervous system activated. So to improve our sleep quality, I encourage people to do it just before bed. So you can put your legs up the wall, or you can just sit quietly and do 20 long, slow breaths or 10 minutes of long, slow breathing. And for a lot of adults, they'll breathe between 14 and 20 times per minute usually, and you want to get it down to 5 to 6 breaths per minute. And obviously there's lots of little tools, and I'm sure you've shared many of them on your podcast, Jodi. You can use a square and trace it with your finger. So there's so many wonderful techniques. There's plenty of apps out there as well that we can use to help slow our breathing right down. So that can be very powerful. And then but it's also, I really encourage people to not just do that just before bed. I encourage people to get rituals in their day so that they are aware of how they're breathing across each day. So if you work at a desk at a computer, you'll be able to see a clock. So every hour on the hour, do 20 long, slow breaths. Or it might be every time you might drive a lot. So every time you're stuck at red traffic lights, forget about your phone. Don't check your phone. Just do long, slow breaths for as long as you're sitting at red traffic lights. Just little rituals across the day that help you to tune into how you're breathing. And before you know it, you'll start to notice when you shift back into that upper chest breathing, and then you can re-engage and breathe slowly. Because, and I think this is a really important point at this point in human evolution, your body responds to the information you give it. So we need to start to find ways to communicate the truth to our body, which is that we are thankfully relatively safe, and our breath and activating that calm arm of the nervous system communicates that safety and therefore supports much better sleep.
Yes, it's powerful to know the relationship between breathing, adrenaline, sleep. And we know that when it comes to anxiety, it's both a cause and an effect of anxiety, isn't it? Like you were saying, when you're filled with adrenaline because you're worrying about something you said, you're reflecting, or you're future focused on something that's coming up, and the adrenaline is coursing through our bloodstream, that we can't sleep well. But we also know we don't sleep well, we're not rested, that we are more prone to feeling anxious. And of course, we know, and it'd be really interesting for you to share how that affects our appetite. I'd love to lead into because one thing I haven't shared a lot about on the podcast is around the role of glucose when the sympathetic arm of the nervous system is activated. So I know when we get tired, we tend to reach for more fat and sugar, don't we? But also there's a lot of really interesting science around glucose and around cellulite and around body fat deposition as well.
Yeah, there is, Jodi. So when I see the stress response has 3 phases, and the way we utilize our fuel, our glucose and our fat varies through those 3 stages. So in stage 1 stress, I refer to that as when adrenaline is high. And so because adrenaline is saying your life's in danger, there's all those biochemical changes I mentioned a moment ago. So blood pressure shoots up, the blood supply that's normally so fantastic at supporting digestion gets diverted away to the arms and the legs, because that's going to help us to fight the fight or get out of there. So, and 1 in 5 women in Australia and New Zealand have irritable bowel syndrome, and food plays a role in that, but so does this stress response. And then the next thing that happens is that fight or flight response that adrenaline changes the fuel that your body perceives is safe and appropriate for you to use. So in any given moment, we're always using a combination of glucose and fat. So even as, we're sitting here talking, we're both using energy, we're chatting, we're blinking, our hearts are beating, we're breathing, we're thinking. As people are listening, some people might be taking notes. So all of that uses fuel. And so right now, am I using 50% glucose and 50% fat, or is it more like 70% glucose and only 30% fat? Or am I burning right now 80% fat and 20% glucose? So it's always a percentage of each, combination of both. But when when we've got a lot of adrenaline, because adrenaline says our life is literally in danger, we need a fast burning fuel to get out of this supposed danger that we're in. And so the body will shift its preferred fuel source when we have high circulating adrenaline to be the fast burning fuel, which is glucose. So if we stay there, and that's fine momentarily, but what a lot of people do, as we said a moment ago, is they end up living like this day in, day out, year after year, and before you know it, a decade has gone past. And your body just will gradually lose the ability to use your body fat effectively as a fuel. But also on top of that, a 70-kilogram person stores about 2,500 calories of glucose. We store glucose in our body as glycogen in our liver and our muscles. And so only 2,500 calories of glucose we store. But a 70-kilogram person, that same person stores about 130,000 calories of fat. So way, way, way more. However, because glucose is our get-out-of-danger fuel, if we live on it, as soon as that fuel tank gets below about half full, our desire for it has to be switched on, because the body's trying to save your life. It's got to make sure that that fuel tank is nice and topped up so that you have got that fuel reserve there to get out of danger if it's needed. And so a lot of people have great knowledge around minimising their refined sugar intake, their added sugar intake, but they often can't resist it. And that there can be emotional reasons for that as well. But certainly this is a biochemical reason that's incredibly common. So that's stage 1 stress. Then when we're constantly producing adrenaline, one of the ramifications of that is inflammation. So both directly and indirectly, that constantly elevated adrenaline production can drive certain inflammatory markers to increase. And the body knows that inflammation is degenerative. And so that's when we move into the second stage of the stress response and we elevate our cortisol, because one of the good things cortisol does is it's a very powerful anti-inflammatory. And so we still haven't dealt with why we're producing all the adrenaline in the first place, and so we've still got elevated adrenaline, but now we've also got elevated cortisol, and it's trying to dampen down the inflammatory effects of the adrenaline. But with elevated cortisol, because for all of human history, up until the very, very recent past, the only long-term stress humans had was when food was in short supply, so floods, famines, and wars. And again, the body has not yet learned to discern between when there's a famine and when we might be experiencing a long-term stress we have these days. We might be worried about a particular relationship or our bank balance or our health, or we might have health concerns for a loved one. To the body, it's all just the same. It's all just elevated cortisol, and that means there's no food left in the world. And so cortisol, as a result of that, is a catabolic hormone. So that means it breaks your muscles down. And the reason, and that then slows metabolism, the reason being that muscles use more fuel than body fat. So the body thinks it's doing you a big favor by slowing your metabolism down, which is going to then increase your body fat levels. And the body thinks that's a good idea because there's no food left in the world, is the information it's getting. And it wants you to still be here when the food supply gets reinstated. So it leads to a very distinct fat deposition pattern. We get fat around the middle and we grow what I lovingly call a back veranda. So we get fat. And so the cortisol thickens us up on our torso. And again, it makes sense when you think about it. If the body's getting the message that there's no food left in the world, all the organs that keep us alive, except for our brain, are all housed in our torso, and they're going to need protection and warmth and nourishment to help get them through these lean times. So cortisol, increases our body fat in that way. It starts to mess with our body's ability to regulate our own blood glucose. It starts to disrupt how appropriate our immune response is. So again, long term, it's highly problematic. The body can handle anything in a short burst, but what we're talking about with rushing woman syndrome is a way of life. And so it's not, we haven't just lived like it because we went through something that was very, very challenging, and then our biochemistry reverted back to the way it was before the challenging event. So much of it starts to come from our perceptions of who we perceive we need to be to maintain the approval of others. And that's where the super juicy work is, because when leading on from the utilization of fuel, and whether it's glucose or fat, another thing that will influence that are our sex hormones. And progesterone is incredibly important for so many biological functions. So yes, it's important for fertility, but it's incredibly important for us to be able to use our body fat effectively as a fuel. But it is one of the most powerful anti-anxiety agents that the body produces. It's also a diuretic, so it allows us to get rid of excess fluid. And what I'm seeing so much of now, to the point that I think I'm probably going to go back on tour and start talking about this, is as women transition through perimenopause to becoming postmenopausal, the racing hearts, the loss of sleep, the tears for reasons that they can't actually name, that is really intensifying for women. And because as they stop ovulate, we produce most of our progesterone after we ovulate. And when we stop ovulating on a regular basis, we lose the beautiful protection that's given us from all sorts of other things. So I'm really noticing that as a huge shift. So yeah, I feel very, very passionate, Jodi, about helping people to get to the heart of that, what I touched on a moment ago, that who do we have to be to maintain the approval of others? Because we rush because we care. So it comes from a really beautiful place, but we also care very much what other people think of us. And it's sometimes hard to see, and it's sometimes a little bit confronting to acknowledge, but there's a lot of beauty when we dig in there, and yeah, it's a special process to start to see that.
Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time. Hi there, Dr. Jodi Richardson here. Do you have a child who's feeling anxious about starting school? A tween who's transitioning to high school, or perhaps a teen who's changing campuses in 2024 or changing schools altogether? Transitions can be especially hard for our kids and teens because they go hand in hand with uncertainty. There are just so many unknowns. But what we know for sure is that uncertainty drives anxiety. And so if you have a child or teen who's feeling anxious about school for any reason, it's perfectly understandable. Left unchecked, anxiety around school can lead to a morning off here or a day off there, and these absences can escalate to school refusal, which is why I've created a new online program for parents called Well, Hello School Anxiety. The program will run live over 4 weeks starting in mid-January, where you'll learn all about the brain, anxiety, and how to identify it, exactly what to do and say when anxiety around school shows up, powerful anxiety management strategies. You'll create a custom plan for your child's unique situation. You'll learn how to enrol the school's help to support your child through the school gate each morning, and so much more. You can learn more about this program and secure your place by heading to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and clicking through from the top of the homepage. I can't wait to work with you and help make school transitions in 2024 smoother and less stressful for the whole family.